"If you don't leave with that dog, I'm calling security," the manager shouted across the dining room, his voice sharp and impatient. The older veteran didn't respond. Instead, he quietly reached down and placed a gentle hand on the vest clearly labeled service dog. Less than 2 hours later, though, the entire restaurant went silent, as a unit of U.S. Marines walked through the door. What brought them there? And what unfolded next that left every single person speechless? Welcome to Uncovered Tales. Let's take a closer look at what really went down. Michael Hayes was 62, a retired Marine whose eyes carried the weight of memories best left unspoken. His silver hair was clipped in the familiar high-end tight style, and he moved with a subtle limp, one that told stories of battles far from home. For the last 8 years, his steady companion had been Duke, a Belgian Malinois with sharp, knowing eyes and a muzzle dusted with gray. His vest bore a clear message: service dog. Do not distract. But Duke was far more than just a service animal. He was Michael's lifeline, trained to recognize the signs of oncoming anxiety before even Michael could. When Michael's breathing would quicken or his hands began to tremble, Duke would press gently against his leg, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. That subtle response had diffused more situations than Michael could count. That Tuesday afternoon, Michael walked into the Blue Water Grill, a cozy little spot known for its seafood specials. He asked for a quiet corner table, away from the lunchtime buzz. Duke slipped under the table with practiced ease, settling between Michael's feet, nearly invisible to anyone else in the room. A young waitress approached with a friendly smile, setting down a glass of water and handing over a menu. But when she caught sight of Duke, her smile faltered. Without saying a word, she turned and hurried toward the back office. Moments later, a man in his 30s emerged wearing a manager's badge. His expression was stern, his disapproval written all over his face. "Sir, we have a strict no-pets policy here," he said, projecting his voice just enough for nearby diners to hear. Michael looked up with quiet composure. "He's not a pet. He's a service dog," he said, pulling out the official certification from his pocket. The manager waved the paperwork off without even glancing at it. "Policy's policy. We've got health codes to follow, and some customers might not be comfortable." From a nearby table, a woman in oversized designer sunglasses chimed in with a dismissive nod. "Exactly. A dog's still a dog, even if he's military," she said, loud enough to make sure Michael heard. The mood shifted. Tension buzzed in the air. Diners who'd been mid-bite now pretended to focus on their plates, though their eyes kept drifting toward the standoff. Michael glanced down at Duke, who stayed completely motionless, trained to remain calm no matter the emotion in his handler's voice. After a pause, Michael looked back at the manager. "This dog pulled me from a wreck engulfed in flames and put himself between me and enemy fire," he said, voice low but resolute. "I'm not leaving him behind just because someone's uncomfortable." The manager folded his arms. "Then I guess you know what you have to do." Michael stood up slowly, shoulders squared, carrying himself with quiet pride despite the sting of being humiliated in public. Duke rose alongside him, perfectly in step, never leaving his side as they walked out. The weight of dozens of eyes followed them, silent and judging. Just outside the doors, an elderly couple who had seen everything walked quickly past them, their heads lowered in quiet respect. The man offered Michael a brief look, just a flicker of understanding, but they said nothing. Maybe they were taught, like so many, to avoid making scenes. Near the entrance, a small group of college students were clustered together, whispering. One of them held his phone low, recording the whole thing like it was just another video for likes. "Look at this guy," one of them sneered. "Thinks his therapy pet is some kind of war hero." His friend chuckled. "Probably another PTSD case making stuff up. My cousin has an anxiety hamster, we should get it a camo vest." Michael heard every word, but he didn't flinch. His jaw tightened slightly. He'd faced worse in Afghanistan than a couple of snickering kids with smartphones. He crossed the street and found a bench in the park, from where he could still see the restaurant. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a sandwich he'd bought earlier, tuna on whole wheat. With practiced care, he split it in two and offered half to Duke. "Not exactly what I promised you today, pal, but it's what we've got," he murmured. Duke took the food gently, eating with the quiet discipline of a dog that never forgot he was on duty. His eyes flicked to Michael's face often, watching for cues, always attentive. After a few minutes of stillness, Michael reached for his wallet and carefully slid out an old photograph, protected by a thin layer of plastic. It showed a younger version of himself, barely conscious on a stretcher, blood staining his face and uniform. Beside him stood Duke, alert and steady, his fur streaked with dirt, and possibly blood. Around the dog's neck hung the distinctive tags of Charlie Squad, Canine Division, deployed to Afghanistan's rugged Zarim district. Duke had earned honors that many soldiers never lived long enough to receive. People passed by without noticing the quiet exchange between a man and his dog. They couldn't see the sorrow, or the weight of memory that lingered in Michael's eyes. "Thrown out again, huh?" he said softly, slipping the photo back into his wallet. Duke didn't need to speak. He just placed his head gently on Michael's knee, a familiar gesture he had offered in foxholes and now offered on park benches. Loyalty, it seemed, didn't care where you were. A young mother gently tugged her curious child by the hand, whispering warnings about not getting too close to unfamiliar men with dogs. Michael acted like he didn't hear. He was used to it by now, being treated as something halfway between a stranger and a potential threat. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly time for Duke's medication. The same explosion that had torn through Michael's leg had left Duke with embedded shrapnel too. Their pain management routines were as shared as their past, two lives scarred by the same blast. As they sat quietly together, a city bus rolled by with an ad plastered along its side, "Honor our veterans, they fought for your freedom." Michael allowed himself a wry smile. The irony wasn't lost on him. Duke couldn't speak, couldn't tell his story, but he had saved lives. And not once had he ever left Michael's side, whether under enemy fire, or under the weight of ridicule and rejection. If you believe a four-legged soldier deserves our respect too, type ROCKY. Roughly 2 hours later, back inside the Blue Water Grill, the buzz of the lunch crowd was beginning to fade when the front door swung open. 5 Marines in full dress blues stepped inside with the kind of synchronized confidence that turned heads. They didn't glance at the host stand, didn't peek at the specials board, they moved in perfect formation straight to the front counter. The sound of forks and glasses paused. Conversations died mid-sentence. A little boy pointed. A man on a business call lowered his phone without realizing. Leading the group was a captain, his uniform crisp, the name Cole stitched cleanly above his heart. He stepped forward and pulled out his military ID. "I'm Captain Nathan Cole, commanding officer of Charlie Squad, 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion," he said clearly. "We're looking for Michael Hayes and his service dog, Duke." The same manager who had confronted Michael earlier now peeked out from the back room, his eyes widening at the sight of the Marine standing at attention. They left," he said, stammering, suddenly aware of the phones now aimed in his direction. "A couple of hours ago." Captain Cole's face didn't change, but his voice carried across every table and chair in the room. "Mr. Hayes is the reason 4 men in my unit came home alive after an ambush near Kandahar," he said firmly. "His dog, Duke, has saved more lives in combat than many medics I've served with. In our records, Duke holds the rank of sergeant, and he's been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal." He paused for a moment, letting that sink in. And this restaurant just turned away a decorated American veteran. No one moved. The woman in the sunglasses who had scoffed earlier stared blankly into her water glass, her cheeks now flushed. A server froze mid-step, a pitcher of iced tea tilted in his hand. One of the Marines held up his phone. "We'll be notifying our statewide veteran support network about what happened here, 15,000 members. Just to make sure they know how their fellow vets are being treated." The manager, flustered, stepped forward with both hands raised. "There's been a misunderstanding. We didn't realize." "That's the issue," Captain Cole said, cutting him off. "You shouldn't need to know a man's service history to treat him with basic decency." The Marines didn't raise their voices. They didn't demand compensation. Captain Cole simply reached into a bag and set a framed photograph on the counter, Duke, dressed in full tactical gear, standing proud beside his unit. At the bottom of the image was a single word, "Brother." Then, without another word, they turned and walked out. As they exited, customers turned their eyes toward the window, where Michael and Duke now sat in an old pickup truck across the street, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed inside. One of the younger servers, a college student who had silently witnessed everything earlier, hurried behind the counter. She packed a takeout container with the day's special, added a slice of pie, and tied it up with a string. Then, she slipped a small handwritten note beneath the twine. She jogged across the street to Michael's truck and gently offered him the package. "We were wrong," the note read. "Please let us make it right." Michael looked at her for a long moment, then glanced back toward the restaurant where faces now crowded the windows. After a beat of quiet thought, he gave her a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resentment either. Just a quiet acknowledgement that someone was trying. As she turned to leave, she heard Michael speak softly to Duke. "What do you think, buddy? Should we give them a second shot?" Duke's tail gave a single, calm wag, a warrior's way of saying, "Ceasefire accepted." A week later, a brand new sign appeared in the Blue Water Grill's front window. "We proudly welcome all veterans and their service companions." Just beneath it hung a framed display featuring photographs of military working dogs through the decades, from World War II all the way to Afghanistan. Outside the restaurant, a small but meaningful ceremony was held by the local veterans organization. At the center of it stood Duke, still alert, still proud, as he received an honorary medal engraved with "Four-legged warrior, above and beyond. Four-legged warrior, above and beyond." Duke held his position with perfect discipline throughout the ceremony, unmoving and focused until Michael quietly gave the release command. Only then did the dog relax. Nearby, children from a local elementary school had created handmade cards, small, colorful tokens of gratitude for both Michael and Duke. Their messages were heartfelt, their crayon drawings of flags and paw prints earnest and sincere. One young boy, probably no more than 7, stepped forward hesitantly. He looked up at Michael with wide, searching eyes. "Does he know what it means when people say thank you?" he asked, pointing shyly at Duke. Michael slowly knelt down, his stiff leg making it an effort, but one he didn't hesitate to make. "He doesn't need words," Michael said gently. "He just needs to be near people who remember what he's done." The restaurant manager had turned in his resignation the very next day after the Marines visited. He left behind a handwritten note addressed to the owner. "Thank you for teaching me something no law ever could. Respect isn't about rulebooks, it's about recognizing the value in someone else's life." The owner, who happened to be the daughter of a Vietnam veteran, took that moment to make real changes. She implemented mandatory training for her staff on service animals and the Americans with Disabilities Act. But more than that, she began hosting monthly community dinners, giving local veterans a platform to share their stories with the people they'd once fought to protect. Michael and Duke became regulars after that, always sitting at the same quiet table in the corner. That spot was now marked with a small American flag and a plaque that read, "Michael and Duke, Charlie Team. Never forgotten." One evening, the student who had filmed the confrontation on his phone finally approached the table, this time without recording. "I deleted the video," he said awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot. "And I just wanted to say, my brother enlisted last week. I'd hope someone would treat him with respect if he ever," his voice trailed off, unfinished. Michael didn't need the words. He simply extended his hand. "Then be that person," he said. "Not someday. Now. For others." Duke never stopped watching over Michael. Even as the years crept in and gray fur gave way to stiffer joints, his senses stayed sharp, always tuned to his handler's unspoken cues. During one lunch, when a car outside backfired loudly, Michael's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Duke was on him in an instant, pressing gently into his leg. This time, the diners around them pretended not to see, not out of awkwardness or discomfort, but out of something new, respect. A quiet kind of honor. 3 months later, Captain Cole's unit was deployed again. Before leaving, the captain returned one final time to hand Michael something precious, a unit coin. It was a rare recognition, especially for someone no longer in active service. Michael tucked it carefully into his pocket, right beside the old photograph of him and Duke on that bloodied Afghan battlefield. 2 small items, one metal, one paper, but together, they meant everything. They were tokens of brotherhood that time, distance, and war could never erase. On warm, quiet evenings, Michael and Duke could sometimes be found sitting on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Their silence wasn't empty, it was filled with stories. Of blistering heat. Of dirt and blood. Of near misses and unthinkable losses. And of loyalty that never wavered. That stillness carried something else too, a simple truth. Sometimes, the world remembers its duty to those who gave all they had, even if that reminder has to wear a uniform to be heard. Not everyone who wears a uniform is a hero. But anyone who stands beside their brother, even if that brother walks on 4 legs, is anything but a coward. You might forget this story in a few days. But if no one keeps telling it, history will stay silent forever. Subscribe to Uncovered Tales, where justice, kindness, and memory are honored, one story at a time.